Hello? Only two students? Where are the others?
Hello, sir.
Hello?
Yes, sir.
Hello? Good evening.
Good evening, sir.
Only two students are there. I have sent it on Learn Know USL. We'll wait for another 5 minutes to start, okay? Uh, Good evening, everybody. I have another, at the moment I have 5 students. I believe there has to be another 3 students for this course. Anyway, now it is 7:44. I'll start at 7:45. I'll share the PowerPoint presentation for you. Okay. Can you see the presentation which we did last time?
Yes, sir.
Okay, great. Right. Is my voice clear? Can you hear me clearly? I guess so. Right. So uh, today I want to teach you about aeration and coagulation. I'm thinking of doing a day school tomorrow at same time. Is it possible for you to have a day school tomorrow at same time? Okay. Now we were talking about water treatment. If you look at this initial diagram that we have presented to you last time, we are going to talk about mainly the flocculation, mainly the coagulation part today. On top of that, we are planning to talk about aeration, which is prior to this stage. Now, first, you need to know what is aeration. Well, aeration is a process where we mix atmospheric air with the water. Now, basically, this is required because aeration, to aerate, we get water from river, deep wells, tube wells, lakes, from such natural places. Now, in these natural places, sometimes these natural processes taking place. For example, anaerobic digestions, uh, then deep sedimentations, things like that. Due to that, there could be certain things present in the water. So this slide clearly shows why we need aeration for drinking water. The first one is to reduce anaerobic water, right? So if the water is anaerobic, it is acidic and it is bad for our health, and it doesn't taste good. So for that reason, we need to aerate. The second reason is to remove undesirable gases such as CO2, ammonia, hydrogen sulfide, which could be toxic for our bodies. Then to increase pH above 6.5 so that the iron and manganese can be removed and reduce corrosivity in water, right? Now, sometimes water tend to contain iron and manganese. If you can increase the pH in water by increasing the amount of dissolved oxygen in water, you can simply precipitate iron and manganese. So the final cause is to increase the dissolved oxygen level, which is essential for drinking water, for it to taste and smell good, right? This is how we increase the taste and the smell of the water, because the taste and smell depends on the impurities or the minerals which are dissolved in water, right? So if we can occupy these spaces, interstitial spaces in water atoms, molecules, by oxygen, so it will reduce the amount of minerals dissolved in water. So by doing that, we can improve the taste and smell. Then there are types of aerators. Basically, there are three types of aerators: spray aerators, multiple tray aerators, and cascade aerators. The cascade aerators can be classified into two. The one type is multiple platform aerators. The other type is step aerators. Now, in spray aerators, as you can see here in this image, the water is sprayed so that it get maximum water air interchange surface. So such aerators are not common in Sri Lanka. We don't use it because they are not that efficient and it is highly energy consuming. Then when it comes to multiple tray aerators, you can see in this image at the bottom left corner, you can see there are some porous trays here and water is poured from top to bottom so that it increase the contact area of water with atmospheric air. Now here, I think in the middle bottom, you can see a multiple platform aerator. I think you have seen this sort of aerators in Sri Lanka. If you go close to water treatment plants, some water treatment plants are displaying this form of multiple platform aerators to the public. Then the other type of aerators are step aerators. You can see we create a step aerator where there are steps, water is flowing from top step to the bottom step so that it get aerated. So when it comes to coagulation, the next step is coagulation, right? Now, coagulation is a very important process in water treatment. The objective of coagulation is to turn the small particles of color, turbidity, and bacteria into large flocks. Now, water contains a lot of particles, natural water. Now, some of them are suspended between water molecules. I'll show you some other slide. So they cannot come down by gravity because of certain other forces. So as a result, it is suspended. It is difficult to remove. So what we do by coagulation is to increase the size of the particle by allowing all the particles to glue together and come down. Coagulation is defined as a method to alter the colloid so that they will be able to approach and adhere to each other to form large flock particles, what I just said. The final bullet, the group of chemicals called coagulants are added to induce particle agglomeration to create above described coagulation. So there are certain group of chemical. There is a group of chemical called coagulants. We add these coagulants to water to facilitate this process. Now, next thing I want to talk about is colloidal stability. You can read details about colloidal stability in your notes, right? Now, before getting into colloidal stability, I would like to discuss few things about the type of solids which are dissolved in water. Now, when we dissolve soil in water, I am quite sure you have done this experiment in grade 6. When you dissolve water in when you dissolve soil in water, you can see some particles floats, some particles settle down as shown in this picture, and some particles will suspend in water as you can see with this merged color. And there are certain things that we can't see. Those are called dissolved solids, mainly minerals like salt, ions, gases, they are dissolved in water, but we can't see them. So these are the 4 types of solids which are normally present in water. There, there are many factors which govern the suspension of soil particles in water. This is mainly caused by negative charge of soil particles. Now, when soil particles are suspended in water, it is caused by many factors. So one of the major factors is that the negativity of the surface of soil particles. Now, let's talk about the negativity of soil particles. Now, mostly soil is made out of silicon, aluminum, magnesium anions, which are surrounded by hydrogen. Cations surrounded by hydrogen and ions. So, what happen is that it creates a surface of negative charges. Right now, let's say if this is aluminum oxide, right? So oxygens are here, aluminum is inside, right? So it creates a structure where the negative charges are present on the surface of the soil particles. Negative charges helps colloids to be suspended among water molecules. This is because you have hydrogen in water, hydrogen are positive, and if the particles are negative, so that the surface is negative, so it allows it to attract to these hydrogen particles, and sometimes these negative soil particles will what do you call, repulse from each other, right? So if we can remove the negativity somehow, it will help you to bring these particles together so that you can make large particles. So such neutralization can be achieved by adding cations to solutions. We add cations to solutions to nullify this negativity. Now, before moving further, I would like to talk few things about zeta potential. Now, imagine that this circle in the middle represents a soil particle. Now, as we have discussed, the surface of the soil particles is negative, right? Surface charge is negative. Now, what happens is that the positive the cations will be around this negative surface, and it creates a layer called Stern layer. I think you can see it is called Stern layer, right? Then after that, there are floating particles which again loosely compact around this particle, creating another plane here, right? Another layer, right? So the ultimate edge of this entire bundle of charges is called slipping plane. You can see it here. Now, if you plot the potential, electric potential created by these charged particles, it has a variation as shown in this small graph here. Now, the electric potential at the slipping plane is called zeta potential, right? Because when you move this particle in a fluid, right, with this particle, all these burns, Stern layer and the slipping plane will move together with it. So whatever the potential charge or the available charge or the zeta potential that can react or act is at the edge of this slipping plane. So this is what we want to measure. So there are several techniques. It is beyond the scope of your study. So we need to neutralize the zeta potential. If you neutralize the zeta potential only, because even though there are positive ions here, right, cations, the problem is that the remaining potential, negative potential will be here. So still, even if we bring another clay particle with negative potential, it will repulse. So that is why we need to check this. So to neutralize, by neutralizing zeta potential, by adding cations and cations with more valency, we can neutralize this charge, which will allow these particles to bond together and create large particles. So that means if we add cations or cations with high valency, what is high valency? Let's say sodium. Sodium has 1 plus, right? Plus 1. But if you add magnesium, magnesium has plus 2, right? Charge. Then if you add alum, so aluminium has plus 3, right? So like that, the valence, if you improve the valency of the cation that you put, you can easily nullify the negativity or the zeta potential here. Now these two graphs shows the effect of the presence of cation. If you have high salts, the variation of zeta potential with the distance away from the particle goes down rapidly. And similarly, you can see with high valency, it goes down rapidly, right? Now, now the cations that we put into this comprise in a group of chemicals called coagulants, right? Now, coagulants is the substance that we mix to neutralize negative charge and create clogs are called coagulants, right? There are 3 properties of a coagulant. So these are the 3 major properties that it should possess. It should be a trivalent cation, so it need to be a 3+1. Then it should be non-toxic. Obvious that we cannot put toxic chemicals into water because ultimately we are going to drink it, right? So number 3, it should be insoluble in neutral pH range. That means when the pH is around 6.5 to 7.5, it should be insoluble so that it will come down simply at neutral pH. This will help to remove coagulants easily. The 2 most commonly used coagulants are aluminium and ferric ion. Now, normally we use aluminium and ferric, right? Ferric chloride and aluminium sulfate normally, right? Now you can see when we add aluminium sulfate, it go under hydrolysis reaction. You can see it in this reaction. So it creates aluminium hydroxide. Above reaction occurs when sufficient bicarbonate are present with high alkalinity. This will only take place at high alkalinity. That means the pH has to be higher. So what happens if it does not have adequate pH? It will react in this way, right? Causing pH to reduce greatly, right? It is found that the optimum pH. Why pH is reduced? You can see according to this reaction, sulfuric acid is created, right? So if you have low pH, the pH will become further low and aluminum will not settle, right? It is found that the optimum pH is approximately 5.5 to 6.5. To maintain this range, the addition of calcium hydroxide to alum is performed. Normally, since this sulfuric acid is produced in this reaction, to neutralize sulfuric acid, we add calcium hydroxide into the water with alum. Now, what happened after putting alum into the water? That is the most important thing, right? Now, when you put aluminum sulfate, it first hydrates, right? It becomes, it goes under hydrolysis reaction and it becomes aluminum hydroxide. Now, this aluminum hydroxide will come together in a mesh, and with that mesh, it will uh, uh, what do you call enmesh all the soil particles which are suspended. So this thing is a heavy uh, uh, particle. So it will come down under gravity. Now here you can see, first we have to give a rapid mixing to make this aluminum hydrolyzed, right? And so then after that we have to mix it slowly to create this mesh, right? So first the particles are dispersed, then they will aggregated to create large particles. Then these large particles will be catched by this mesh and it will come down under gravity. Now here in this figure 4.8 in your note, you can see the two electron microscopic images of this process. Now on the left hand side, you can see dispersed particles. On the right hand side, you can see it is getting enmeshed with the aluminum hydroxide, and this mesh will come down. That is what is happening in flocculation and settlement, right? Now, in order to perform this coagulation, first we need to know how much alum is required. So to do that, there is a very interesting test called jar test. So in this test, I'll read it from here. One of the most common methods to evaluate coagulation efficiency is to conduct jar tests. Jar tests are performed in an apparatus such as shown in figure 4. Now, this figure is there now. This is we call it a gang stirrer. It has a gang and it stirs, right? It rotates, right? 6 beakers are filled with water to be treated for colloidal contamination. Now, we have to fill 6 beakers with the same type of water that we need to remove suspended matter from. Then each is mixed and flocculated uniformly by a gang stirrer. Now, it is uniformly at the same rate by a gang stirrer. Now, to conduct this test, we change the concentration of alum in each beaker. We can conduct the test to find the optimum alum concentration, which removes the suspended matter. Before that, we need to know the optimum calcium hydroxide amount to achieve the pH range. So we do two tests. First one is to get rid of to know the best pH. Next one is to find the best of dosage of alum, right? Now, before going further, you need to know about turbidity of water, right? Now here on your left top left corner, you can see that there are 4 test tubes. Now you can see the turbidity increase with the color, right? So turbidity is a measurement of clarity of water. So clarity means it represents the suspended matter in it, right? Usually measured with these two units, NTU and FNU. And we use a meter as shown here. We call it a turbidity meter. We put the sample here and we get the measurement. Now the principle of turbidity measurement is shown in this diagram. So I mean, these are additional information for you. So there is a light source, it emits the light, and when this light comes and hit the particles in the water sample, let's say this is a suspended particle, part of it will go through and part of it will get scattered. And this scattered light will be measured using a detector. And this detector will convert it to the corresponding unit, this metric turbidity units, right? and that is what we read as turbidity. So what we do, a test is often conducted in two sets by first dosing each jar with the same alum dose and varying the pH in each jar. After stirring, flocks are allowed to settle and the turbidity is measured in upper level waters. The following figure 4.10 shows the effect of different alum doses and pH values on the removal of colloids from water. Now I will show you a video. With that you will understand this test. Now what do? We change the pH with the constant alum dosage and we measure the turbidity of the water. Now this, you can see the lowest turbidity is achieved between 6 to 6.5. So this is the optimum pH for this water to conduct, to mix alum. So whatever the concentration of calcium hydroxide, which gives the optimum pH, can be used to conduct alum mixing. Now, then after that, we adjust the pH to that pH and we change the alum dose. And you can see there is an optimum alum dose which gives the minimum amount of turbidity, which is the clarity of the water, right? So that value is the optimum value alum dose, optimum value to add to remove turbidity. That is how we do the test. Now, I'll show you the short video clip after discussing this. Now, if you remember your previous diagram, the initial diagram, you can see before mixing in your treatment plant, there was a process called coagulation adding. Now, this needs to add mechanically using dosing pumps. Then after that, it should be properly mixed here. For mixing is normally done using a pump or a hydraulic structure like this. This is called a partial flow. Now in a treatment plant, it is essential to measure flow. And with that such apparatus, you can see here, it creates a hydraulic jump somewhere here. Now, if you mix prior to this, it will have a very good mixing in this apparatus. So that is what it means, coagulant dispersion. Now with that, I will stop this slideshow. Then I'll try to share a video, see whether you will see this.
Jar test for the determination of optimum coagulability.
Can you see this movie? Can you hear it? Do you hear it? Can you hear the video? Okay, I can see that some of you can't hear it. Okay, then I'll try to share this to you. I'll show you what they do. You can see there is a gangster here. She is mixing different concentrations. And what do? They put it into these different beakers, and they are going to they are mixing it. You can see first they mix it rapidly for 1 minute. Then after that, they mix it slowly. You can see they mix it very slowly for about 15 minutes. Then after that, they take the beakers out and allow it to settle and take the samples, top water samples, and from each beaker, and they measure turbidity using a turbidity meter. I'll show you the turbidity meter. Now you can see this is a turbidity meter, and they put the sample there, and they measure turbidity. Now after that, you can plot the turbidity versus the alum concentration in each beaker, and you can ended up having a plot like this. You can see now here it gives you the optimum alum concentration. So that is how we normally conduct the jar test. That is all I wanted to do it today, but I will do day school tomorrow on flocculation and sedimentation. And if possible, I'll try to finish the filtration as well, right? So please come to the day school tomorrow at 7:30. I'll put the message in Learn OUSL. I'll share this video to the YouTube channel. I think you know the YouTube channel. It is there in the YouTube channel, and I will share the video. I will try to put everything into Learn OUSL. I will put the links. You can see. So if you have any questions, you can ask now. I think there is one chat question. Yeah, this is the first lesson, actually session 4 in block 2. Do you have block 2? Okay, then I'll share this session 4 for you, right? On Learn OUSL, right? I'll share this and I'll send the links for tomorrow's lecture. Then I will upload the YouTube. I upload this to YouTube. Then first about the CAT exam, I'll be examining you. Yeah, somebody is asking about CAT. We will examine you up to session 4, right? First 3 lessons and this lesson. I think first 3 lessons were done by Professor Banduni. Then after that, it was shifted to me. Then so I will be asking from block 1 and from the first lesson of this block 2. Okay. Do you have any more questions? Please ask. Do you have any more questions? You can ask any question, no issue. Because tomorrow also we are going to do a day school at 7:30. And I'm going to upload this video to this YouTube channel. Again, I'll type if you. Okay. This is the YouTube channel, right? Somebody is asking MCQ one. No, it's going to be MCQ. Okay. MCQ because MCQ. It's a MCQ paper, right? It's going to be an MCQ paper. you will have to read the notes and get ready, right? It won't be difficult if you read the books and come. And it is also an open book exam. The matter is you have limited time period to answer, right? For each question. So if you are conversant with your notes and book, it will be easy for you to answer the paper, right? I will not ask anything outside, right? So I can see some of them are joining right now, right? I can help. So for the next class, you can come tomorrow at 7:30. I will send you the link with the Learn OUSL, right? Do you have any more questions? So somebody is asking about survey 2. It will be also in MCQ type, right? I'll be doing a day school for survey 2. I'll send you the link, right? I'll be doing another day school, one more day school before the exam for survey 2 as well. So those who have just joined, please go through the video which I will upload to the YouTube channel. I think you know I have just typed it in the chat to everyone. I'll type it again. I will upload it soon, right? Do you have any more questions? Unfortunately, with this limited teaching facility, there is a limit that we can do. We'll try our best to do some to show you some videos. Okay. Okay, then if you don't have any more questions, I'll stop. Right. Thank you. Please come to class tomorrow at 7:30 again, right?